right. So, Mr. Greg Tate,
Yes, sir.
how are you?
I'm good, man.
Meet the class. Everyone's here. I don't know what view you're looking at, but yeah, everyone in the class is here. Some are showing their faces and some aren't. But I gave them a little background on you at the
Okay.
beginning.
Now I can see everybody.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I am recording, so I have to make that known to you.
Hmm.
I am honored to have you here and to discuss with you some things on Afrofuturism and music.
Sure enough.
Right. So, first, let me just. So we were talking about Mark Derry and that interview he had with you, Samuel, and Tricia. Is that how you say her
Yeah.
name?
Oh, Trisha Rose.
Tricia.
Trisha Rose.
Yeah. And that's the first time
Professor Trisha Rose. Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
That's the first time we ever heard the word Afrofuturism. And at that point, what did you, when you first heard the word, because words are so powerful, and of course you're a wordsmith, what did you think of that word when you first heard that word?
Um, it was interesting. I didn't think much of it. You know what I mean? Like, because I think my name or the term I was using, and Arthur Jaffa and I were using, was like black science fiction. You know, which covered not just fiction but all things in the realm of the black and speculative that were already present in the culture. You
Yeah.
know, but Charles Joseph of the Wonderland Art Society, you know, part of the creative team with Janelle Monáe, around I think it was around 2004, 2005, he gave me an inkling of how much that word meant to his generation. And then when I was teaching at Brown, you know, probably about 3 or 4 years later, I had a student of mine just say that what he loved about the word was that it gave him hope. You
Oh,
know,
that's
so I
beautiful.
understood. Yeah, so I understood then that there was another kind of um, there was a sense of possibility and a sense of movement that was gathering around the word movement in the, you know, kind of the creative and the political sense. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
yeah,
When I
yeah,
first heard the word, I was like, oh man, everyone's going to know the secret of this, intersection of what we've been loving for so long. But then it was a beautiful thing because it brought together this community
yeah,
around the word. And
yeah, yeah,
it look at us now. We're teaching a class on Afrofuturism and electronic music. Like that's wild,
yeah.
and it has a lot to do with quote unquote. I hate to say the word, but branding.
Well, I look at it more in the realm of what Jamaicans, the Rastas call word sound power. You
Mm,
know,
mm.
it's like when words stick like that to a movement, like funk, like punk, you know, like free jazz or hip hop. You know, then you know that there's a certain magic
Yeah,
in the phrase itself. You know, and you just watch the way that it kind of captured the imaginations, you know, of a whole host of folks. You know what I mean? Who were looking, I think, partly for, you know, what was going to be the expanded visionary platform um, beyond what um, beyond the stereotype of hip hop. You know, because one of the things that always happens in the course of these innovative forms of black music in particular is that, you know, there's a whole kind of seesaw thing going on in terms of its interaction with commerce, you
yeah,
know, with capitalism, with commodification, you know, and you know, at the point at which um, the boardrooms are kind of dictating, you know, the most popular flavor of the thing,
right.
then they become exhausted on a certain level as kind of free spaces, you know, for creatives, you know. So folks are always about migrating to that next galaxy, that next kind of open space.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that expansive creativity can't occur within hip hop, but it does mean that you find that for Kendrick Lamar to emerge, there had to be tremendous resources behind him and a tremendous
Absolutely.
amount of strategy, and a kind of tactical response to the industry. I mean, he's somebody that early on got the support of Dr. Dre. You know what I mean? But he had a strong team behind him. He had a vision as well, But I always believe that, as with Motown,
Yes.
that you go into the community and for every one who gets picked, there's 20 or 30 more people, of that same caliber who are, kind of outside the lab,
Yeah.
and it becomes over time as a thing becomes more and more assimilated into the mercantile system of the music industry. It becomes harder and harder for those folks to get in. So those outliers have to find their own way. So Funkadelic is a problem with Funkadelic is a good example of something that, couldn't really fit inside of what Motown had become by the late
Absolutely.
60s. So they had to do their own thing, on an indie label, you know.
Absolutely. Same with
Yeah.
Sun Ra.
Yeah.
We're
Well, Sunrise was operating on just such um, a kind of quantum leap level above, around everybody else because, you really look to him as somebody who shows you how to sustain a vision, with nickels and dimes and peanuts.
yes.
You know what I mean? And a certain amount of good fortune. In terms of how they got that house in Philly. Um, it was inherited by
Right.
Marshall Allen. And
Right. I
so
told the
yeah,
class. Yeah. His
yeah.
dad.
So
His dad.
like that lab has a home for life. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? Yeah, yeah. But that's all about just knowing that the system as it is not really working for you. Yeah, excuse me. So you've got to go that extra mile to like house and feed, and then costume, and then tour and
Right.
self-produce your own music and records and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which there are a lot of music majors, of course, here, and a lot of them I've told like you have to kind of create your own community. Just you got to do it yourself, and we have the tools now. Like the tools now, we had the tools then, but it was more expensive. You had to press vinyl. We didn't have internet like this, but it's easier to kind of create, of course, from with the intention that's honest and true. And I think if you create your community and your world,
hmm
that you can be heard and you can break through. What do you think?
Well, I think it's also about having a clear sense of
Purpose.
mission, and also part of that is just knowing the things that you refuse to do.
Oh,
It's
nice.
about your refusals as much as your assertions. You know what I mean? So, I mean, Sunrod, wasn't looking for necessarily the Blue Note label deal for life, or it wasn't showing up
Right.
for him. But that Sunrod was somebody who was, by the time he makes that first record, say around 1955, 56, I mean, he's already like 20 years in motion in terms of
Yeah.
the way he wants to participate, the way he wants to advance,
Yes.
the way he wants to be engaged in his imagineering,
Yes.
right? And his embodying of a certain aesthetic and ethic and, astro blackness.
Exactly.
I mean, he understood himself as somebody very different, coming up in Alabama, you know what I mean? But coming up in a very nurturing community at the same time.
Right.
because if Sun Ra will deny he was even born on Earth, but then he'll talk about all these great music teachers he had in Jim Crow, Alabama, where in certain places in the South, people really did have a separate but equal school system. In fact, better than equal school system. Because you had all these brilliant black minds that couldn't weren't allowed to
Yes.
seek employment, inside of segregated America. So they poured everything into these kids that they were given charge of,
Yeah.
in these uh, elementary schools and high schools. My mother grew up in Memphis, and she said, because of the kind of teacher she said every day was Black History Month, in her education. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
When was your
So,
first? Oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I
No,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to
Go ahead.
say, when was your first? Well, I was telling the class how my first, first it came from my parents and the seed that they set. They used to take me to shows and all of this all the time. But also,
Mm-hmm.
I was addicted to television. So I talked about
Yeah.
Ultraman, Johnny Sacco and his flying robot, and
Right.
Uhura, on Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
First African American, first black woman I saw, first black person I saw in a role that wasn't subservient and that sort of thing.
Right.
So, but also in a context of space, and I was really into astronomy. And so, what was your first? What was your first kind of moment when you thought outside the box, per se?
It's kind of interesting, man, because
Because you're Ohio, yeah?
yeah, 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 and my parents were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. They were at the March on Washington. My mother played Malcolm X speeches and Nina Simone records,
Same, yeah.
all the time. Yeah, and but inside of the home, my brother and I like both collected Marvel comics, and we both like watched Creature Feature on Saturday, like all
Oh,
the
yeah.
horror movies and science fiction movies. Yeah, you know what I mean. So in a way, like the that was inside the box, of just the expanded um, kind of realm that we lived in, because if you were involved with civil rights movement or Black Power movement, we're engaged in like a futurist project. Okay, you are already thinking about this whole notion of Black revolution in society, right? Taking control of the means of production and
Absolutely.
confronting authority. I mean, all these things, and there was some kind of connection that got made early between that realm of imagination and then what was going on in the science fiction literature and comics and films that I
Right.
was reading. And then the music that was starting to come online as I became a teenager was Jimi Hendrix, Sly Stone, the
Exactly. Yeah.
psychedelic Temptations, early Funkadelic. You
Yes.
know what I mean? So all these things seem of a piece to me. They didn't seem like disparate. They all seemed part of like one worldview that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of coalescing in my imagination. And then, I was trying to, write and draw my own comics at the time, and then I discovered Miri Baraka's book Black Music, and that's the book
Right.
that introduced me to Sun Ra, to Ornette Coleman, to John Coltrane,
Yes.
to Wayne Shorter. And
Yeah.
I read those essays, and all the people he was interviewing seemed to be thinking in this incredibly forward kind of way about the way music could transform your sense of identity, your sense of society, your sense of possibility.
Yes.
So all of those artists initially, like Cecil Taylor is in there
Oh, Cecil.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but they all just seem like incredibly um, uh, diverse and complex individuals, who were making this music that was called Baraka was calling like the new black music,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Black classical music.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's some. That's Rasan, but yeah,
Spiritual.
but specifically, I'm just in this book. It was
Yeah,
like,
yeah, got you.
yeah, he was just talking about the energy that was going on in this music, and he was connecting it to what was going on in these freedom struggles. But then he was also connecting it to what was going on in Black popular music. So he's got this great essay that I'd advise everybody to read called "The Changing Same: R&B and the New Black Music." Right, and
Okay.
it's a real free form kind of essay. Where I mean, he's just like just generating a myriad of ideas, like with every sentence. But he's making this
Oh, man.
connection between what's going on in terms of this very cosmopolitan, um, you know, kind of new jazz that's using influences from all kinds of places, and then what's going on in the R&B of the period, and how they're both kind of unlocking,
Yes.
these energy fields,
Yep.
and they're transforming our very notion of what music could be. And so he's got this great line in there where he talks about the screaming of James Brown, and he says that he
Powerful.
said it's more radical than the screaming of John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman, right?
Right.
So it's like he's making this connection that James Brown himself makes in that great kind of long form version of Super Bad, where he's got the saxophone player in his band and he calls out to him and he says come on man, give me some train, give me some train.
Yeah, exactly.
And he starts going, you know what I'm saying? So like James Brown is making that leap, that Baraka had made in that essay. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? But when you listen to like James Brown screams, it's like, yeah, they are more piercing and penetrating than even what the cats are doing on their horns, man. So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so it's all about these linkages, I
Yeah,
think, that are going on kind of simultaneously. You know what I mean? That are just pushing and kind of advancing
absolutely.
the sonics of
Yes.
the music, and so people are doing it. Sun Ra is doing it with he's making it explicit, with a
Yes.
film like Spaces of Place and the synthesizer, but inside of in his acoustic music, there was always that deep kind of eerie spectral feeling
Yeah.
going on too. That way of kind of creating his sense of the music of the stars, and then
Totally.
embodying, you know, his alien. It's like all Black folks experience alienation. People of African descent, are going to experience alienation within, the construct of, the racialized
Yes.
construct of this society. Multiple consciousness. Double consciousness. Du
Double
Bois
conscious.
called it. We
Yeah.
know it's multiple consciousness now. Yeah. Um, so the music, is always a place, is the realm where you can openly express, that alienation or that hidden rage, and also that speculative vision, kind
Yes.
of all in the same beat, the same loop, you know.
Well, it's funny. Like next week, you still there?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
If
I'm still here.
second, yeah.
Yeah,
Next week,
yeah.
we're interviewing Julian Priester, and diving into
Oh man,
Mwandishi.
master. Yeah,
Yeah, you can join
yeah.
us as well if you want. But Mwandishi, to me,
Oh yes, great.
it blew my mind, and I think all my students here, they're gonna lose their mind when they hear Mwandishi, and also I have some video from that.
Mhm.
But um, I think Ytasha's here as well.
Yes, hello.
Oh, there she
Hey,
is.
what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great.
I already gave everyone a kind of a short background on you, but if you just want to introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Ytasha Womack, and I am best known for my work in Afrofuturism. I wrote a book called Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Speculative Culture that really just explores the aesthetic and looks at it as a tool of healing and its impact on culture. And I write a lot of sci-fi. I started off doing a lot of music writing, very much in the music journalism space, and I centralize a lot of my work around dance and dance therapy.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah,
I
I
hear
can
you,
hear
bro.
you. Mhm.
So I had asked Greg this earlier, but when you first heard the term Afrofuturism, what did you feel? How did you feel about the word?
Well, my first feeling was automatically I knew what it was.
Yeah.
It took me straight back to conversations I had in college. But then my second emotion was, why haven't I heard this before?
Okay.
The
Hmm.
term itself,
Yeah.
because it defined so much of who I was, so much of the culture that I was a part of. And as a person who covered music and entertainment, and felt like I was at least at the pulse of things, I didn't remember hearing that term. Um, and I realized that for so many people, not knowing the term itself was a point of frustration. You know,
Yeah.
there are a lot of artists who looked at space and time and culture and saw these intersections, but felt like they were on some sort of fringe, not realizing there was a term to really define what they were doing.
Mm.
And so that overcame me more than anything else, which ultimately led me to writing the book.
Right. I was going to ask you what led you to what was the tipping point where okay, I have to write a book on this.
Well, the a friend of mine was teaching the class. She told me she was teaching a class on Afrofuturism, and when she was describing it, uh, I thought about, again, all of this early experience in funk music, growing up philosophically in a metaphysics context. I thought about all of my relationship to electronic music and dance and the inherent optimism and resilience and a lot of the cultural production. And so, there were certain artists that she mentioned that I really knew. And then there were other artists I didn't know. And as I started to do some research, I didn't see sort of one central document to really explain what
Yeah.
Afrofuturism was that was
Yeah.
sort of easy reading and easily accessible.
Yes, yes. Yeah, because
And
more brilliant than the sun, uh, Ishan, that's one of my favorite books of all time, but it's not an easy read. It's definitely, it takes a few readings to
and
kind
then up until fairly recently, it was almost impossible to get.
of.
I mean, it was
Oh,
like
it's
over
back out?
100.
It's back out?
Yeah, it was re-released.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
let you talk. Sorry.
Mhm. Oh no, that's okay. I'm always going to jump in.
Now, there's the delay. So there's a delay. Um,
Oh,
no, it's just the way Zoom is. And so sometimes that the rhythm of conversation is interrupted by the delay. So I have to kind of get used to that. But when your book came out, I remember you sent me the unproofread version, which I still have and cherish. Um, I was just blown. I was like, wow, this is it. This is the one that's going to permeate the air for those who can't see through the thick haze. You know what I mean? Because there were all these kind of papers, and there are a few books, but not specifically getting to the point of Afrofuturism in all its forms in a way that anyone can just read. And I thought it was fantastic. And the cover, I love the cover too. Um,
thank you.
yeah, it really encompassed everything. Greg, when you did you well, I'm not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you read the book. What did you think of the book when you first saw that it was coming out and you read it?
No, I did. I did actually didn't know about Ytasha's work till we were on a panel
Ah,
in in Chicago. It was a few years ago, right?
Yeah, it was. It was a
Yeah,
pretty,
yeah, yeah,
I would say it was an awesome panel too, especially the presentation that you did. It was at a Sunrock conference.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, like you, no, I was glad to see that somebody had kind of put all the pieces together for folks. Like provided that handbook. You know,
yeah, the hand.
um, and it also had the virtue of speaking in a generationally accessible way. Because
Mm,
I mean, I I was fortunate enough to see Sun Ra, in his prime, and
too.
P Funk, and Mothership, and all all that kind of stuff. But the thing is that um, every new generation, particularly with our culture, has to be kind of given a major information dump, as they call it in science fiction, and also understand that they have the license to make these things, remake them in their own image to kind of advance the narrative,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
tell their own stories too. So, I thought Ytasha really kind of opened that pathway. She's definitely one of the people. I think along with folks like Chuck Lighton, kind of, and Nate Wonder and Janelle,
Oh yeah.
open up that lane, for their generation.
Yeah, I think Janelle Monáe definitely took the term into pop culture.
Yeah.
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 I mean, as soon as she said it, everyone was like, "What?" Elle
Oh
magazine,
yeah.
all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
magazines, because like you said earlier, that word is a very, very powerful word.
And I think it's kind of significant too that Janelle's team, Chuck Lightning and the whole crew, they came out of the Atlanta University Center.
Mhm.
The Morehouse, Spelman's,
Yeah.
Clark Atlanta. I came out of Clark Atlanta, and the culture was very much steeped in Afrofuturism. And when I was in college, Greg, your work was work that everyone was reading. We were all trying to get copies of the Village Voice and see what Greg
Right.
Tate
Oh
was
yeah.
saying. And
No, man. Yeah. Yeah, I had a book called Everything But the Burden: What White People Are Taking from Black Culture, and came out around 2004. And and I remember getting a call from Chuck asking, if I wanted to come down and do a reading. And so that's when we met. And that's kind of before Janelle came into the mix, but they were already developing those ideas, as Ytasha says, like in that futurist environment of Atlanta, which had been, preceded by the futurism of the civil rights movement, but then as well, certainly Outkast and the Dungeon Family. You know what I mean? So there was that thread running through, but those guys are real. They're just real scholars,
Yeah.
around everything they do. They do deep research around everything they do. So they know about, they knew about, kind of all the precedents, that existed not just in Black culture, but I remember, um, Chuck had a copy of the book about Walt Disney. He was reading at the time, just studying the way you put together a kind of creative empire around your most visionary impulses, you know.
Yeah.
So, um, they really, they brought an understanding of how they want to infiltrate the matrix into the thing as well, and kind of be in control of their own narrative. And that's why they were able to do so much, kind of pull off things that really we hadn't seen people pull off since like Wu-Tang Clan or P-Funk, in
Right.
terms of just being in control of their corporate destiny,
Right.
as well. Yeah.
And you were right about earlier about, having that vision before going into it, knowing exactly what you want and what you don't want and what you will do and what you won't do. I love that
Yeah.
statement that you
Yeah.
said that.
Yeah. The refusals,
The
you
refusal.
know. Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. The negative confessions, the negations, Yeah. Yeah.
So, Ytasha, let me ask you too, since we're focusing this class more on, of course, music, but this class itself is encompassing everything. But the course is focused on music. But you, as a dancer, and especially growing up in Chicago, and house music, which we're going to be touching on in a few weeks. I had the honor of speaking to Mr. Robert Owens, and for me, he's the voice of a generation and the beginnings of house music, and his voice just took it to other stratospheres. But Afrofuturism, the idea of it musically, from a dancer point of view, how did that affect you?
Well, it's really fascinating. I grew up in dance. I started dancing well, not professionally, but taking classes at 6. And in the West, when you start off taking dance, it's modern and tap. And I came out of a Mayfair Academy, which was founded by an African American tap dancer who named Sammy Dyer, who kind of studied under Bojangles and so forth. And so he created this school in the 50s. And I was just sort of coming up through that dance school. And at the same time, the backdrop of the house music scene in Chicago was becoming very dominant. So on the one hand, I'm doing tap dancing, which is really kind of body percussion, right? And we're tapping to Cuban jazz for the most part, which is not common.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
But it sort of attuned me to being unusually rhythmic in a different sort of way, especially if you're tap dancing to Cuban jazz, right? It's a different idea. And so in addition to that, I'm coming
Yeah,
up.
I don't want to see that video.
Oh my gosh. Yes, that's talk about feathers and plumes and fishnets.
Mm.
That was our tap
Oh, so
dance.
you're bringing a whole Celia Cruz vibe to it.
Oh my God, that was how we were trained for the most part. Kick routines, jump splits. I mean, it was fantastic.
Wow.
So you had that as like a foundation. And then, outside of that, there's this house music scene. And because I was coming up more or less 80s, moving into 90s, it wasn't deep house that I heard initially. Deep house I kind of got more into when I got into college. So my strain of house music was more or less the sort of trackier acid house.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's
So it was
yeah.
right, and it was kind of what you would call like pre-juke music. Well,
Yep.
we were kind of calling it juke, but it was right before footwork became popular. So it was all this heavy, tracky. It was just like so digital, but so rhythmic
Absolutely.
at the same time, and that was like our quote unquote street dancing, right? And so we moved from that into high school, same thing. I was taking a lot of modern dance classes. And in addition, I was also captain of the pom pom team. So we're putting all this house music into our routines and trying to slip in little dances. And we went to nationals, all those cheerleading dance movies you see.
Bring
That
it
was my
on.
life. Right. That was me.
Bring it
I know
on.
that story. But from there, when I went to college at Clark Atlanta, house music was not popular in Atlanta.
Yeah, not yet.
Right, not at that point. It was very sort of underground. So you would go to these parties and because you had students from so many places, they're playing a little bit of go-go from DC, they're playing Southern hip hop, they're playing Miami bass kind of post-Luke style music. They're playing, of course, East and West Coast. This is, Biggie and Tupac are getting into their beef. And at the end of the night, they play a little bit of house music. But the one place I could go to was the Funk Jazz Cafe in Atlanta.
Yeah, of course.
The legendary, yeah.
Right, and Jason Orr, and they'd have a live band that was doing funk jazz, and then they'd always play house music. And that became the opportunity to just dance all night.
Right.
And it was different. Dancing to house music is different than dancing to hip hop. Hip hop, the rhythms are a little slower sometimes. And there were periods where there are specific dances that you do, but you're sort of locked in the movements, right? You're locked in the beat. With house music and, circa disco, etc., it's about getting you into a trance state.
Right.
So you're moving and grooving. And for me, it was great because I could throw in all the dance styles I had done, You can do some of the sort of party dancing. You could throw in your modern. If I felt like tap dancing in the middle, no one would know what
It
was
was
going on.
free. You were free.
Precisely. And that was something I started to crave because in Chicago, it was everywhere. But going to Atlanta, I had to really seek it out.
Right. Was
And
MJQ, was that around yet? MJQ is a club in Atlanta that big for house music, but it might have been too early.
and I might have been too young
Got it.
too.
Oh,
Like,
got it.
yeah.
Didn't even think about that. Yes, yes.
Right. And so that was just sort of an interesting scene. And when I came back to Chicago, I was very much in the mode of pursuing this journalism career, but I had to dance. So I'm going out dancing 3 times a week. They always play house music everywhere you go here. And I started thinking, okay, well, let me learn some salsa, let me learn rumba, I started taking tango lessons, all kinds of things because I wanted dance to be a part of my life. And at some point, it just dawned on me like, look, you could do that too, but house music is kind of where you are.
Yeah.
And there's a beauty in freestyle.
Yes.
So, I came from a family of people who dance socially. They were all steppers. Stepping is like this partner dancing that's, kind of, it comes out of
Out of
Chicago,
Chicago.
popular in Detroit. And,
And it's multi-generational, right?
very much so.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
it's like I'm a third generation
Oh,
stepper. It's like step or bust. By the time you were 12, you had to know how to step. Like
Step
you
or
were
bust.
I'm so serious. Like you were not going to become an adult and not know how to step. In our family, that just wasn't. It wasn't what was going to happen. So, but with all of that, you would say, well, what does any of that have to do with Afrofuturism? It's looking at the resilience of dance.
Yes.
That's really it. The resilience, the fact that when you're moving to music, you create your own space and time. There's a nimbleness. You're able to spot patterns. These rhythms are patterns, and I think it enhances intuition. I think that there is, when you're not moving certain body parts, you can sort of get locked in certain thought processes. There is a relationship between mind and body. And if you're, an able-bodied person, making sure that you're moving your hips, moving your chest, um, all these sort of foundational moves that are core elements of African diasporic dance
Absolutely.
are really just essential movements, but they are healing movements. And I think that's the part that gets lost. People who don't dance on a regular basis just look at it either as, some sort of uncontrolled ecstasy, or they look at it as highly sexual.
Okay.
But when you are dancing, you're not aware unless you're performing. You're more or less in your own space. You're able to connect with people. It's an energy. And I just, one of the things that's really touched me, particularly in this period we're in, is the inherent resilience that's encoded in a lot of this music and the dance movements.
Yes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's because movement was a survival mode, for folks in enslavement.
Absolutely.
They got that time to themselves on a Saturday and Sunday. Where it was all about, you couldn't freely express yourself verbally. You couldn't even allow yourself to express things necessarily through your eyes. At that
Mm-hmm.
point in time, but in movement, folks were free. And so and then able, like things like about the Charleston, well, that was like a mockery, of
Yes.
the so-called masters that was done, like kind of hiding in
Mhm.
plain sight. And then you got ring shouts, which are kind of definitely the precursors to all the trance dance um, um, maneuvers, or movements, that emerged later on, where people just gave themselves over,
Yes.
to
Mm-hmm.
to the floor, to the movement, to the dance, to the rhythm,
Happens all the
you
time
know.
in house music.
Yeah, but it's like Latasha said. I mean, so much of our cultural survival is encoded, in that relationship to the beat, to the rhythm, to the internal rhythm, as well.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
I look at house dancing,
body percussion. You know what I mean? Hand boning,
and
all
I
those things.
Hmm.
I look at
Yeah,
that as improvisation, especially house music dancing.
Oh, completely.
Improvisation over,
yeah. Oh yeah,
yeah, it runs parallel to an improviser playing sax or whatever, or like we were saying earlier with Sun Ra, you know, giving space. You're creating a space within a space in between the notes. You're improvising with those movements, and I've seen
yeah,
you dance, so I know when I was spinning, I was like, "Yo, I gotta make her do like some crazy stuff," as you were inspiring me as well. So
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, well, because it's a call and response. The
exactly,
same relationship between the dancer and the drum is the same relationship between the dancer and the DJ.
yes, yes, that's beautifully
yeah,
said. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And then, there's a DJ here, New York, Storm and Norman,
oh
and
yeah,
he started. Yeah. Well, Norman, man. Yeah, but he started doing these house music events in a park here in Harlem, Sunday sermon, right?
Mm.
And it was very interesting because a lot of the folks who came out were like OG house dancers, up in Body and Soul in the Shelter, those kind of places, for years. But now, they're coming as adults. They're coming as, people with, 9 to 5s and kids and the whole thing, you know what I mean? But they
yes,
create this beautiful just environment in the music and in their movement and sound, kind of a revival, right? But the thing is, because it's in gentrified Harlem, it was also very much policed,
yeah,
So there was like a limit, a curfew on how long they could be in the park. Police showed up 6:30 on the dot to let us know they were shutting it down. You know what I mean? So and it kind of you know it showed Norman that there was and other folks as well, that there was a radical political dimension to black people, peacefully gathering
oh,
to
absolutely,
express themselves. You know what I'm saying? You
always
know,
been.
yeah. So it's like the eyes of the state, are on black joy. They're on black pleasure. Not just on the things that are considered, uh, you know, criminal,
Yes.
or anarchic or what have you. Yeah.
So I want to bring it back to Greg real quick. We're coming towards the end of our conversation, but Greg, burnt sugar for me, it blew my mind when I first saw you guys. What was the point where you wanted to start burnt sugar?
Oh man, it was I I wanted to create the conditions under which Miles Davis created Bitches Brew. So
Okay.
I knew he took some of the baddest players he could find, took them in the studio, and then he kind of conducted and orchestrated that music into being. And then later, his producer or his co-collaborator Teo Macero,
Yeah.
you know, because Miles' whole mo was, bring these 15 or so musicians in, just start playing, and he told Macero just keep the tape running. So
Right.
they did that for 3 days. They just kept the tape running, and then Miles said, "Okay, here's the tapes."
Yep.
Like organize it into 2 albums. And so I wanted to recreate that whole process, and this was like around 1999.
Okay.
And but I also wanted to bring in this this system that a good friend of mine called conduction, that a good friend Lawrence, the late great Lawrence Butch Morris, had developed, and it was basically bringing the role of the conductor to improvise music. And to do
Absolutely.
that, Butch invented about 30 different hand and baton signals that you use to coordinate and recompose and rearrange the music. And,
Yes.
and to me, it was very much aligned with the zeitgeist of hip hop in terms of the breakbeat, but how do you bring the breakbeat into like free improvised music? Well,
Right.
Butch invented a couple of ways of doing that. He invented one cue was like called memory, right? He taps his hand with a finger, that's memory one. And then he might do memory two. And then he'll do memory three. And the whole thing is like all of this he might hit those in the course of the band and the music being in motion, right? But it means that stop that, store that idea, and we're going to revive it later. So he may hit the memory one, go off in another direction for 20 minutes, and then 20 minutes later he'll be like, boom, zoom, we're going back to memory one, and you got to hit it. And a musician asked him once, like, well, how many memories are there? He said, I have 5 fingers on each hand. So
Yeah.
I saw performances where he taxed the band with like 6 memories. They had to return to. You know what I mean? But it's just about bringing that capacity of storage and retrieval to like live music, right?
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
it's also about being able to create improvised music without needing like words or
Yeah.
to even speak the same language. Because I saw him do it with musicians from Afghanistan, musicians from Senegal, musicians from Turkey,
Yeah.
Italy. Folks that didn't, and that was like through a translator. He just did a workshop where he taught them the cues, and that was the only language they needed to create like
Absolutely.
this incredible, expansive orchestral performance. So I wanted to bridge what Miles was doing, 69 with Bitches Brew, and then what I saw Butch do in like kind of 80s, 90s, early 2000s New York, with these conduction ensembles, these conduction orchestras.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
I forget where it was. I saw you guys in New York, but it just blew my mind, man. I was like, it really brought me back to when I was a kid and saw Sun Ra for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And also it was such a large collective of beautiful musicians, to see it
Yeah.
live, to see you working live. Because I just recently worked with Tyshawn Suri.
Oh yeah,
He's
yeah. Tyshawn's like
yeah,
he's
yeah,
totally taking up the
exactly.
taking up the
Taking the
baton, as it
baton.
were. Yeah, exactly. He's carrying on the baton too. Yeah,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And my last question, I'm gonna say this to you, Tasha. Um, when was your first moment of hearing Sun Ra? Like, how did you feel when you heard Sun Ra for the first time?
Well, I learned about Sun Ra as an adult, actually.
Got you.
I didn't grow up listening to him. And again, I was a little surprised because I grew up listening to a lot of jazz, but then I could kind of understand why I might not have stumbled upon him either.
Mhm.
And hearing him, he didn't exactly fit, in the pocket. I think the first Sunrise song I heard was Astro Black.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
And it it really emphasized to me that we're so accustomed to hearing a certain set of patterns or chords and melodies arranged in really specific ways. And it was so obvious that he was really intentional in wanting to highlight that level of programming and almost making you think about, well, what does that mean?
Uh,
So when I'm listening to Astro Black and you have kind of that, I don't know if it's a didgeridoo in the beginning or what the sound was, and it was like, wow, it was a certain freedom there, you know.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I just felt like his music spoke to a freedom, but even in that freedom, in what appears to be improvisation, there's a level of mastery through which improvisation has to come.
Absolutely.
And I just feel like it really captured that and wanted to just challenge everything you thought about music.
Yes. Um, that's actually the most perfect answer because I just did so after every class, the last hour of the class, I create a mix of music from what we talked about. Like, so I did a mix now which includes Astro Black, funny enough. Sun Ra, Don Cherry, Art Ensemble of Chicago, all these incredible groups that I'll play, after we finish. But, um, you expressing that whole idea of freedom inside the music, but still there's a structure there that really leads us to next week's course, next week's class. And to end on this is like the most perfect thing you could have said. Now I want to open it up for a few questions, just for 10 minutes. Let's see if we can get some of the students here, if there are any questions that you want. I think Alexis has a question.
Hi, yeah, thank y'all so much for being here. This is really exciting for a first day. When Ytasha was talking about the resilience of dance, it made me think about Octavia Butler, and in Wild Seed, she talks about how we can't underestimate. Let me get the exact quote because I don't want to be messed up. She says, you cannot know how well people's bodies remember their ancestors. And that was from Wild Seed, which was 1980. And I'm just wondering, are there any other authors around that time or before that time, as Sun Ra's putting together the orchestra, that you would see as really instrumental to informing Afrofuturism as it was developing?
Well, Samuel Delaney is an author that a lot of people reference. And I would say, in looking at a lot of things, a lot of the music criticism, I think is really kind of good to look at. Looking at works by like Ishmael Reed,
Oh, wow,
for
yeah.
example, I think is really important. And I think what you'll kind of find, ironically, is you see threads in a lot of work. Toni Morrison, I think, has a lot of sort of threads in some of her work, especially like A Song of Solomon. Well, you'll kind of get this idea of like timelessness and a connection to the ancestors and a connection to the future, even if they're not using the term Afrofuturism or maybe don't appear to be talking about the future. There is an idea of prophecy and speaking to a future, and recognizing that there is a past. You know, when I usually talk about Afrofuturism, I say it's a way of looking at the future or alternate realities through a Black cultural lens. And it intersects the imagination, technology, liberation, and mysticism. So I think sometimes it's that lens. And when you look at some of these classic works of the past, you'll start to see, wait a second, there are a lot of people speaking to this idea of connecting to their ancestors and then moving to a future.
Yeah, but I also, this is also second Google suggestion for the day. Look up the company, dance company, Urban Bushwomen, right?
Oh, my
It was
God.
developed by a choreographer named Jawale Zolar, who I believe danced with Sun Ra at one point, and I know her brother James Zolar is a trumpeter that played with Sun Ra. But she developed this collective of all women dancers, and they've been around now for, I want to say, at least 25 years. And they've gone through several iterations, but Jawale's work, you know, draws on her inspiration from the house community, from the African dance community in New York, and from Sun Ra, you know, and that whole realm, and Funkadelic, and that whole realm of music. So she brought that into like the art dance world, you know, kind of the formal dance world. And I know you can go online and you can find representation.
It is a lot.
You know, documentation of you know, some of the performances. You know, yeah, they're amazing. You know, they're really amazing.
And in our Ask Canvas, there are a few references that for works that you could read, and also I'll grab a few of these links as well and throw them into that section on in our Canvas. We got another question, Anahita.
Hi, thank you so much for this inspiring conversations. It's so amazing to hear both of you, the way that you explain about a lot of different things. I have a question. Actually, I think Ytasha, you talked about that, about improvisation in house music at the very stages, very early stages, and how the house music dance, actually, that's what I actually was interested, is sort of improvisation. Are there any like documentation that you could recommend from like the very early stages online or somewhere, or someone that you can or both of you, any of you, can like recommend to check them out?
Oh, as far as like the dance?
Yes. So you mentioned that the house music, when it started, it was something very new and it was very just underground. But it was a sort of improvisation. And then I think, Greg, you talked about how the movements with the rhythm and the drone, the relationship between the dance and the drone. So I was just wondering if, like, visually, if you know any documentation of specific, or maybe videos of you even, that you can recommend to, like, I'm curious to like see this improvisation. That's why I'm asking.
I
Man,
did
no.
a
Oh, go ahead.
go,
Go ahead.
okay.
No.
Well, there's a documentary called The Debauchery Ball
Oh yeah.
that came out, and a friend of mine, he's a poet. His name is Kahari the Disco Poet, and he pretty much was a guy who did poetry. He loved house music. He had this birthday party. It was a birthday party I would go to every year, and it just got bigger and bigger to the point where he turned it into a documentary that started touring last summer. And so that's a project I would suggest taking a look at. And what I can do too, um, King, is give you a link to a love letter to the ancestors from Chicago.
Oh,
That
okay.
was
Thank you.
that was the 15-minute film I did where I pulled from different house music dancers to
Jeez.
really
Great.
sort of highlight the beauty of freestyle dance,
Mm.
and the narratives that it can tell, and it really pulls from the house music culture. So I
Please, I'll
think,
put it in the curriculum
okay,
ASAP.
cool.
Yeah, I had Maestro, and I was there the day house music started. House music was born. That's part of the curriculum too.
Oh, nice.
Those links, yeah, both of those links they have to watch. They don't know it yet, but they have to watch in 2 weeks. um, Greg, did you have anything to add to that, or you good?
No, I was just thinking like a documentary on like some of the OG house dancers who are still around, who are like, I mean, they're in the most like fit shape you could
Oh
imagine.
man, yeah.
Anybody being at any age, but definitely at like 65 and up, and they can still go out there and kill it.
Flips,
So,
yeah.
all of it. Yeah.
It's very acrobatic.
Yeah.
All right, we got one last question due to time, and that's Stephen Britt. What's up, man? Good to see you. You're muted. Let's see. I'll unmute you. I got you. You there? There
Hi,
you go.
King. This question's for Greg.
Yeah.
You talked about how, like, during Motown especially, there was a lot of artists that were kind of cast to the wayside, even though they were the same caliber of musician. But I just want to know, recently, anyone can put out their own music. Basically, we have these huge online platforms. So how has that changed the rate at which Black music progresses?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing is, one of the deficits and the benefits of kind of music biz 1.0 was the curatorial aspect, right? So, and by that I mean, like, once people could make their own CDs, I know that I noticed when I was at The Voice that our events editor, his desk was piled with towers of CDs that nobody was going to ever listen to, right? Mm-hmm. So there's something to be said for the way Cream had to like grind its way to the top, as it were, inside the old music business, and then it was also the development of talent was also just nurtured by the road and the competition of the road that went on like these package tours they did where, you know, when I was coming up, you didn't just go see Funkadelic, but Funkadelic was on a bill with like Rufus and Al Green and Bobby Womack and the
Yes.
Last Poets
Oh my
and
God.
Gil Scott Heron. So I mean, every week it would just flip like that, right? You know, but that's how, you know, that was when a certain kind of oral tradition was maintained. Like people learned how to become better musicians, like on the road, you know.
Mm.
So it's different now because you know, a lot of that kind of development goes on in like the black churches, you know, and the mega churches especially, you know, that have like they have bands that are equal to the bands that, you know, a Prince band, you know what I mean, or the
Oh
Roots,
yeah.
you know what I mean. So and so the problem though is kind of you have this development of skills, but because a lot of those folks are used to just getting paid every week for playing in the church. They're not necessarily trying to create their own thing. You know, they might be doing jam sessions inside, but some of these folks, you'll see them like if you go see Kendrick or Jay-Z or J. Cole, you know, any of these folks, and they have a band, you know, Beyonce, you know, a lot of those musicians come out of those church
And half of them are
situations.
from
Yeah.
Philly.
Hey, right.
Right.
You know,
Philly church.
so you know, it's like and the aesthetic, of course, around music has changed, you know, as you know, people have they have access to means of production, you know, or recreating the sound of a bass or the sound of a Farfisa organ or so
Yeah.
forth. But you don't necessarily have the specialists, you know, I mean, who develop like very unique expressive skills, you know what I'm saying? So um, it's you know, we're just in an era that has an absence of bands. It doesn't mean that the music doesn't keep developing in its own way, you know what I mean, but it just means there's this echo or this absence there of a
Mm.
thing that's not the thing that's not being done, you know, that made for just so much amazing music. It was like a lot of hip hop producers would tell you um, they stopped using records that were recorded after 77 because that's when the band culture kind of died, you know, the instrumental culture kind of died,
Yeah.
you know, the economic support for it died, you know what I mean? So previous to that, before the drum machines came online, you know, people could afford to take 17-piece bands out on the road. It's kind of amazing even when I look at it, you know, like,
Yeah.
wow.
Well, you also had
Even as somebody who has a big band, I'm like amazed inside of commercial music, like they were splitting up the pie like that. But that's the way they could get to that sound. So, you know, so yeah, I mean, in terms of you know what we call like you know like R&B, contemporary kind of like popular music, the absence of that band culture, you know, kind of makes itself felt in terms of the creative limits of it. You know what I mean?
and also the
Creative limits of people kind of working in musical quarantine. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
like what made Parliament Funkadelic so great was George Clinton told cats when they showed up, like everything they told you not to play over there, play that here. So that's why there's just so much diverse creativity. That's why they've got all these records that sound nothing alike. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
the
does
players were
Parliament
pretty. Yeah.
Funkadelic totally different than actually Funkadelic, you know, because like got that cooler psychedelic kind of, you know, saturated sound from the
Well, see,
earlier.
that's the thing. Like Parliament Live. I mean, Parliament Funkadelic Live is like they give it all to you. They play like they'll play the hits, but then they'll play like Mommy What's a Funkadelic too. They'll go all the way back. You know what I mean? Just depending on the night you catch them. You know, because
Yeah.
they've got all the same players. I mean, that's kind of the genius of it. Is like, you know, as George said, you know, he said, yeah, we had 12 different acts on 12 different labels with the same band. You know, and so I mean, so basically, they created these kind of pods or these labs, you know, to develop different ideas, different people's ideas in the music. You know what I mean? So
James Brown was
uh,
the same way.
yeah, well, but James didn't give people the like. That's why Bootsy left. You
Right.
know, because there was a limit to like
Money.
what you
Yeah.
could do. You know, how free you could be
Right.
with James Brown. They just realized like, yeah, you know, and then you know they started working with when they started working with Parliament Funkadelic, like they, you know, those members of the band like, you know, were able to just freely develop, their most outrageous ideas. There was a
Absolutely.
home for them. You know what I mean? So,
But also
I
there
mean,
was
they turned the jam session into a business model. You know what I mean?
and the
So,
major labels supported this.
well, they didn't have a choice because, as soon as they had that first like gold record, it was like, whatever you want to do. And
Exactly.
so George said, well, I got a lot I want to do. Yeah, but I mean, and that's something that again, like, I made the point originally about, Kendrick happens now because of the resources behind it. You know what I mean? It's like he couldn't do that by himself in his bedroom. You know what I mean? Working
Well,
with
you could get close, maybe. You could get close.
yeah. But but I mean, it's a combination of just such of a collaboration, and then also just having a label that can like, support you in
The label was a thing.
like getting great studios and great mics and engineers and all of that,
Yeah.
to work with, to create, the sonic profile on that level. It's like, it's just a lot of money. There's a lot of production money behind a Kendrick record, in spite of the fact that, like, everything is, we've got all this amazing software and unlimited tracks, whatnot. But there's something that happens when you got a team in there, and then you also know that as soon as you finish it, as soon as you master it, like, boom, this label's gonna put it out worldwide instantaneously. You know what I mean? So
I do think
it's
there's
an
a lot
interesting
of,
dichotomy. Yeah.
I do feel like there's a lot of artists today, like emerging artists, who do hold themselves back because they're preoccupied with marketability.
Oh yeah.
So, right. So although you could create your own music, you could get it out on these platforms, they're really concerned about, well, is it marketable enough? And then, so although they're not technically working in a label dynamic, they're still trying to place these pressures on themselves as if they are. And
then I think but there are models, I think, now of people kind of working digitally, but working in a conceptual way that where they're also kind of pushing against the conservatism and the commodification too. You know what I mean? So I look at the way, Tyler and Odd Future started out.
Unbelievable.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's like, it's that Wu-Tang model. Like, you just take the most creative folks in your cipher and you bring them together, and you guys feed off each other, and you kind of push the outrage, button, hard as you can, when you jump out. But out of that, you get Tyler, you get Earl, you get Sid the Kid, you know what I mean?
Frank Ocean.
Like, but then I'm also looking at Moore Mother right now.
Oh yeah, of course, Philly.
Yeah, and I mean, she just created her own pathway.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
From the beginning.
Yeah. And again, it's somebody who had a clear sense of intentions.
Yes.
And refusals, right?
Exactly.
Because I mean, as militant as any radical, I mean, she's left of left, in terms of her feminism, or her Black futurism, or Black feminism.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But she's also like an amazing improviser as a digital performer. Like, if you go to see her live, she's delivering these incredible lyrics, these incredible poems, but then she's manipulating her sound, her technology live too. So, she's like a great hybrid of a improvising electronic composer and as revolutionary a poet as has come down the pipeline since forever.
Exactly. And working with her in the studio is crazy, man. Like, just, because I worked on her last album and I did 2 songs, and just the synergy and right on the spot, like coming in and just right on the spot writing.
Yeah.
We're lucky enough we'll be interviewing her in a few weeks here.
Oh man, I'll definitely be back for that, man. Yeah, she's an amazing person too.
Yeah, it's gonna be her and Shabazz Palaces on the same day. So,
that's fresh.
Yeah. Man, I'm glad you recording these classes, man. These are gonna be some. I mean, no, for real, man. No, for real. These are gonna be like some classic documents of the state of the art.
Thank you.
The state of Black sonic art. Man.
Well, I'm super honored that both of you joined us today.
Man, I'm honored to be part of this lineup you got coming through, man.
Yeah, same here. This is epic.